Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. On tonight's programme, my special guest is Scottish writer and political activist Lizzie Eldridge. Welcome,
Hi.
Lizzie. I understand you've just come all the way from Malta.
I have, yes.
To be on this programme
To
tonight.
be on this
You're
programme,
flown all
that's
the way
right.
in. So we'll be bringing you in, Lizzie, later on in the programme to talk about some of today's breaking news events.
Okay.
But to our first story, and the ITV leaders debate last night, in which, well, to be fair, not a great deal happened, but in the back of all of this, there is a very strange occurrence has happened. Twitter has accused the Conservatives of misleading the public after they rebranded one of their official party accounts to make it look like a fact-checking service during the ITV leaders debate. The party was widely criticised on Tuesday night when it temporarily changed the name of its Conservative campaign headquarters press office Twitter account, which is followed by nearly 76,000 users, to Fact Check UK from its usual CCHQ press. The account's avatar was switched during the debate from the party's logo to a white tick on a purple background, and the account was used to promote pro-Tory statements prefixed with the word fact. Shortly after the debate finished, the Twitter account name was changed back to CCHQ Press. On Wednesday morning, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, defended the move and told BBC Breakfast that no one gives a toss about the social media cut and thrust. And I'm quoting his words there exactly. In a statement, Twitter said the Conservatives had misled the public and it would take, and I'm quoting here as well, decisive corrective action if a similar stunt was attempted again. Twitter is committed to facilitating healthy debate throughout the UK general election, said a spokesman. We have global rules in place that prohibit behaviour that can mislead people, including those with verified accounts. Any further attempts to mislead people by editing verified profiles' information in a manner seen during the UK election debate will result in decisive corrective action. The Labour MP David Lammy called on the Electoral Commission to investigate and punish what he called a blatant attempt to deceive the public. The Conservative Party press office, CCHQ Press, rebranding themselves as Fact Check, shows what disdain this party and this government has for the truth. Now, coming to you now, what was I going to say? Sorry, Lizzie, I was just going to say, coming back to you, you have a lot of experience of corruption back in Malta, and I know that we'll be speaking about that later in the programme this evening. What do you make of this story where we have the political party's actual headquarters, its own press corps, its own press pack, disguising itself as a fact-checking organisation during the leaders' debate?
Well, I'd like to say it's disgraceful, and it is, but it's also, I mean, this seems to be the normal way that people behave these days, you know, to parade around, to lie. Boris Johnson tells lies, that's his daily fare, and to parade lies as truth. And to use words, I mean, again, it is a very kind of Orwellian universe in which we live, but to use words like fact-checker when it's quite clearly not, you know, the reverse.
Just by placing the word fact in large block capitals before something somehow gives it this cachet, this capital that it wouldn't normally have.
Absolutely.
Hannah Bardell, the SNP's spokesperson and candidate for Livingston, has said the Tories have confirmed what we've all known all along, that they simply cannot be trusted. Given Boris Johnson has a track record for misleading people, even misleading the Queen, it's no surprise that they would stoop this low. But with the public laughing at Johnson's efforts to pretend that he cares about the truth, it is clear that we won't be fooled. Now, this reference to Boris Johnson being laughed at is actually something which happened during the live television feed when he began to speak, when the Prime Minister began to speak about the truth and how he was going to stand up for the truth, and he thought that this was paramount. There was a quite loud laughter from the audience at this point. I think for the first time, actually, since I've ever watched any of these sort of prime ministerial debates, it's the first time I've ever heard an audience laugh at a prime minister who didn't intend them to laugh.
Well, it reminds me a bit, there was a news night recently with the Tory MP, the female Tory MP, and she said something about, Boris Johnson really cares about Scotland. And the audience just fell about laughing as well. And you think, that's what it has come to, where people, in a way it's quite good, because people are not falling for rubbish all the time.
Even the television audiences in live television studios now are not falling for this anymore either.
Absolutely, because it's too ridiculous.
And even Jeremy Corbyn was subjected to the same treatment when he started talking about how he was standing up against anti-Semitism. There was another ripple of laughter at that moment as well. It appears that British politics just isn't trusted by anybody anymore, and British politicians seem to have nothing surprises people anymore. And even the story that we were speaking about tonight, about them switching out the name of the Conservative Party's press office to a fact-checking organisation, is just being glossed over. It's been swept under the carpet.
And it's like they don't care either. They don't care either. If you believe them or not, that's not really the point. If you get their votes, that's fair enough. But it's not really about, it's I will say whatever and you can believe it or not believe it. It will probably not be true at the moment because a lot of things are not. It's just disturbing, because words like integrity, which to my mind are really crucial,
have no value anymore in political
not really.
discourse.
It's like, you can wear this costume today and wear another one tomorrow and say you said this yesterday or didn't, and you have Trump doing that par excellence.
We famously had our Prime Minister stating quite boldly that if he didn't get us out of the European Union by a certain date, he would rather be dead in a ditch. And of course, he didn't get us out of the European Union on the said date.
Alive.
And much to many people's disappointment, he's not dead, nor is he in any ditches at the moment. However, let's move on. The ITV debate was apparently watched by 6.7 million people. It makes you wonder whether it was actually half that number. They kind of wandered off and then came back again, and they've counted them twice. The first televised leaders' debate between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn attracted an average audience of 6.7 million viewers to ITV, suggesting that the public is taking an increased interest in a general election campaign that has so far struggled to draw a significant TV or online audience. With a little over 3 weeks until polling day, the debate attracted a third of the British television audience on a Tuesday night. A Snap YouGov poll found that the public thought there was no clear winner, with Boris Johnson polling at 51% and Jeremy Corbyn on 49%. Although I would point out actually that there have been 6 other polls. And this one, which is quoted by the BBC, the YouGov poll, is the only one that put Boris Johnson ahead, apparently. Although this is obviously not in the script this evening. However, there have been other polls which show the opposite of this. So it's really, it's one of those situations where there's little between the two men. And I think the public see this rather as a Hobson's choice. You have Brexit under one party or Brexit under another party, but nobody seems to really be able to get behind either one of them. I don't know if this is something which, since you've come back to the UK from Malta, that you've actually had a chance to sort of gauge the political temperature since you came home.
No, it's all I've gathered is that Johnson's going to clearly win the election in December. I mean,
is that generally the way people?
That's what, as far as I'm perceiving it, which is a terrifying thought. And that if he does, then stability of the pound, for example, the exchange rate, which of course I'm interested in, is all going to be the pound will be strong with a Conservative win.
Well, Tuesday night's viewing figures are a substantial increase on the 2017 general election, when Theresa May boycotted most of the television debates. She wouldn't appear on any of them. And that resulted in much of the public choosing not to watch anything. It also bodes well for public interest in the BBC's head-to-head debate on the 6th of December, while emphasising the damage done to the Liberal Democrats and the SNP by the decision of the broadcasters, in conjunction with Labour and the Conservatives, to give a platform only to the leaders of the two major parties. Now, this is something which has been a hot topic on social media for the last few days. Is the last is the fact that none of the two smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats or the SNP, and the SNP is the third largest party in Westminster, neither of them was invited to take part in this leadership debate. And there is actually Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP and Scottish Independents were mentioned a total of 29 times during this debate, and yet the SNP were not invited to take part. And commenting, the deputy leader of the SNP Westminster Group, Kirsty Blackman, has said the clear outcome from last night's debate is that while neither Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn can be trusted to decide Scotland's future, the SNP is central to the outcome of this election, with both parties knowing that Scotland can hold the balance of power. It was typical of the broken Westminster system that Scotland's future was being debated while the views of around half the Scottish voters were locked out of the room. It seems that, and not just Scottish voters, half of the British public was disenfranchised because there was no Remain party in there either. And both the Liberal Democrats and the SNP both support remaining in the EU. And like we've just had a debate in which there has only been one side of Brexit being put forward.
Yeah. And also reinforcing the traditional, there are only two-party system, which is just not the case. I mean,
No.
And hasn't been for actually a very long time.
Well, now there are 4, maybe 5 parties, if you include the Brexit party in there as a party, although many people are not disposed to think of them as a party. The Westminster, just coming back to Kirsty Blackman here, the deputy leader of the SNP Westminster Group, she said the clear outcome of last night's debate, just being through that part, she said it was precisely this kind of approach that shows exactly why we in Scotland would be in a far better position if we were making our own decisions as an independent country and not having to put up with these two English politicians from their binary political system from the past, which no longer seems to have any meaning.
I know, it is very strange. I mean, devolution happened 22 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, 1999.
So why they are still assuming that, we are back in wherever we were in the 1980s or whatever, is a very strange thing. And you'd also expect more voices the better. I mean, don't you want to hear more voices, more ideas, more
I'm fairly certain that the voters would like to hear more voices. Yeah. And they are only being allowed to hear what the British media wants them to hear, which appears to be either Brexit Tory or Brexit Labour, but nothing else at the moment. Anyway, I'd like to move on from the dreaded B word, as we call it, the dreaded breakfast word, and move on to another story, which is still linked to Brexit, and this is Michael Gove. Now, Michael Gove has been challenged to come clean with Scotland's farmers on his Brexit plans during a visit to the southwest of Scotland today. More than 3 years after the Brexit vote, the SNP said that it beggars belief that one of its chief architects is still unable to answer basic questions about funding around the export tariffs and about skill shortages caused by the Tories' hostile environment immigration policy. Amanda Brugauer, the SNP candidate for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale, said that platitudes and vague assurances were not enough, and Mr Gove needed to start being straight with farmers and the agricultural sector. She went on to say any form of Brexit will be bad for our agricultural industry. This election is a chance for Scotland to escape from the Brexit mess and to choose a better future and to support a rural economy to thrive. Mr Gove is still unable to tell Scotland's farmers and crofters if he's planning to cut their funding after Brexit. He still won't say whether key exports such as beef and lamb face devastating tariffs or being traded away as part of a future trade deal. And he still won't say how key farming sectors like dairy, fruit and veg will be able to recruit the vital labour from the EU and beyond after the Tories close the door to migrant workers. Now, this is a story which raises its head time and again with Brexit. The whole issue of immigration was largely touted as the reason for people to vote for Brexit, particularly in England, that immigration was the bogeyman, and that by leaving the European Union somehow this was going to stop it. But what it has stopped is the flow of migrant labourers who come over to the UK every summer and every autumn to pick fruit and vegetables and to work in sheep farms and dairy farms of the rest of the UK as well as Scotland. It will also be affecting all kinds of other sectors in Scotland. So I don't know. You perhaps are, I don't know what the farming community is like in Malta. I have no
small,
idea.
Actually, it doesn't actually produce a lot of its own.
Too small, perhaps, for that.
Yeah. Plus, at the minute, there's a big construction crisis, I would call it actually, which is connected to corruption.
Yeah.
So planning permits are being given. Labour Party donors, the government donors are getting permission to build towers, etc.
Right.
So a lot of the agricultural land and land in general has been taken over by the construction industry, which is extremely corrupt.
So there are plans, there are problems, with land ownership and the acquisition of land for
building
businesses.
Big towers and building big apartments and building hotels and all the rest of this stuff.
Is there a migration issue in Malta?
Oh, yes, because and this has been the case for a long time. I mean, well over a decade, 15 years, I would say, because Malta is the first piece of land that people come to from Africa, between Africa and Europe, before they get to Europe, exactly. So for a long time, people have been arriving in boats. There was one summer when literally a boat was arriving every day with people trying to escape from whatever situations they were coming from.
Yeah.
Then you had the Libyan war as well. And what you have now is a lot of racism. And the racism is stirred up by the government. And you have... Malta is a small country, yes it is.
How many of a population is there in Malta nowadays?
About under 500,000.
So it's sort of roughly equivalent to perhaps a country the size of Iceland, maybe, about several 100,000,
but it's
half a million.
But on a very small space.
On a small space,
yes. So about 500,000 people.
And does Malta rely quite heavily on Europe for some of its imported food or agricultural produce?
It imports a lot.
Yeah.
So the prices are kind of high as well because it doesn't have a lot of. There's not a big farming industry. It's very, very small.
There is a fishing industry, I understand, in Malta.
Yeah,
is there not?
there is. But that's come under a lot of criticism as well. There was a big tuna laundering scandal recently where...
Tuna laundering, did you say?
I know.
I'm sorry, that
it's bizarre.
A very strange image in my mind.
I know, but tuna pens, illegal tuna pens are being allowed. Far too much fish in them. It was actually causing slime in the sea.
So it's causing damage to the marine environment because of overcrowding.
Absolutely, and they were breaking. I mean, it was a big European scandal as well. Because it was.
So, although Malta is a very small place, I mean, as I say, probably just a little bit smaller than Iceland, but doesn't seem to have Iceland's massive natural resources.
No.
And I'd like to move things on a little bit further now. In the SNP, let me see, Brendan O'Hara is basically... let me just check where we are here. Okay. We're still just finishing off this item on Scotland's farmers, and this is again the SNP is just saying that it's time for Michael Gove to come clean with Scotland's farmers and crofters about his Brexit plans. They don't need more platitudes or vague assurances that it will be all right on the night. He just needs them. He needs to start being straight with them and to provide honest answers about how Brexit will affect them. Now. We also have an item here in which Nicola Sturgeon is warning that the future of Scotland is at stake. Now, we have a bit of a hole in the script here, so I think we'll move to the next story. Forgive me. Brendan O'Hara, and he has said that Joe Swinson should apologise for the Lib Dems coalition record. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jo Swinson is, I'm sorry if you don't know who Jo Swinson is. She is the new leader of the Liberal Democrat Party.
Okay, I know who she is then.
She is a Scottish MP. She's actually the MP for my own constituency in Eastern Barton. And the SNP has said that the Liberal Democrats cannot hide from their record in coalition with the Tories. That has scarred communities across the country. Now, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats were in coalition for quite a while. And the SNP candidate here for Argyll and Bute, Brendan O'Hara, has now called on the Liberal Democrats to issue a long overdue apology to the working families across Scotland for their decision to prop up the Tories in government, voting through a plethora of right-wing policies in return for ministerial jobs. Now, earlier in the week, the Lib Dem leader at Holyrood, Willie Rennie, branded Joe Swinson's voting record while serving as a minister in the Tory coalition government as, and I'm quoting here, a mistake. Yesterday, a new poll from YouGov revealed that the Liberal Democrat leader's popularity has plummeted as she has become more well-known. Now, this is a very peculiar happening. A new leader usually has a bit of a honeymoon period when they take over a new party. Ms Swinson seems to become a new leader, and as soon as people hear a little bit more from her, her ratings seem to plummet. She was a minister during 2015, and she voted through, or she didn't stand against a number of Tory policies. She is pretty unpopular amongst, shall we say, the more left-wing amongst us. Mm-hmm. But as much as the Liberal Democrats try, voters won't have the wool pulled over their eyes. Joe Swinson, he says, is one of the most enthusiastic cheerleaders for the coalition government's programme of austerity and welfare cuts that scarred working communities across Scotland. No wonder polling shows her popularity has plummeted as the campaign has progressed. People haven't forgotten that it was the Liberal Democrats who trebled university tuition fees. Now, this was after the Liberal Democrats promised university students that they would never raise tuition fees. And as soon as they got into power with the Tory government, that was exactly what they did. They did eventually apologise for that some years later, but the damage was done, and there's a whole generation of university graduates who never forgiven them for it. It's a shame, really, because there have been a number of fairly talented female politicians in various parties. Jo Swinson, for some reason, seems to get people's backs up. It's, she gets a lot of abuse because she has diluted her Scottish accent and become very anglicised since she went to Westminster. And these austerity and welfare cuts, people seem to see her very much as a sort of closet conservative.
She's very, as I say, I've just come back from Malta, so she was a kind of new face on me. Yeah. And she strikes as a very strange choice for a leader of any party.
Which choice are you referring to? The nuclear choice?
Well, I'm not a believer that the leaders have to be these kind of strong, charismatic people, but she's like somebody that just popped up. When you were walking along the street, she kind of pops up in view on the TV, and you think, "Who's this?" Or she's the leader of the Lib Dems. What?
She seems very bubbly and enthusiastic, but many people see that she seems to lack a little bit of gravitas and a little bit of presence.
I would agree. I would agree completely. I've never heard what they're talking about her policies, so I don't want to comment on them. But as a person, as a personality, as I say, she seems like the person you would just kind of say hello to in the street and pass by. She doesn't have any kind of strength or sense of being when she's on camera.
One of the very first things that she was asked on television was she was talking about Jeremy Corbyn, about the opposition party leader, and she said that unlike Jeremy Corbyn, she would be prepared to push the nuclear button. She's reiterated this again, and it's as if it's some kind of virility test that you have to pass. You have to be able to say, yes, I would nuke the entire world if I was asked to do it, otherwise you can't be a Prime Minister. But it's coming from a female Prime Minister, and one with, the kind of aura that she has, this bubbly, young thing, it's a sort of smiley face. She doesn't strike anybody as the sort of person who really should be pushing any nuclear buttons at all.
Well, it's okay to be young and it's okay to be smiley and all the rest of it. She just doesn't convince me that she knows what she's talking about. She doesn't, the sense of gravitas, I think, is what you said, and that's what I think she lacks. it just surprised me. I was like, if she's the leader of the Lib Dems, and
You might, I don't know, you might remember Kezia. A few years ago, the Labour Party in Scotland at the Holyrood Parliament had a leader called Kezia Dugdale. And Kezia Dugdale, I think, very, very similar to Joe Swinson. Anyway, I'm going to leave this subject now because I realise you've just come back from from Malta. You know nothing about this. So we're moving back to Boris Johnson. And this is a story that Boris Johnson says that he has never seen any evidence of Russian interference. Now, we're talking about Russian interference in the British general election and possibly the Brexit referendum as well. Now, Mr. Johnson has said today that he had never seen any evidence of Russian interference in any British democracy. He said there's absolutely no evidence that I've ever seen of any Russian interference in UK democratic processes. When he was asked about the decision not to publish a parliamentary report on alleged Russian meddling. Now, this is a report which Boris chose to cover up or to smother before the general election began. And we know that this report, which was published by, I think it was the House Security Commission, one of the government's commissions which looks into security issues. Mm-hmm. It is a government committee report, so it's a very important document, and it's the Oversight Committee for Defence and for Espionage and Security. And they had published this and sent it to Number 10 to be basically to be signed off and to be discussed in Parliament and for the other leaders to see it. And Boris wouldn't release it. And there is, since then there's been a question mark over why he doesn't want this information out there. Have you heard something about this as well?
Yes, I have. And I mean, I think the links between Boris Johnson and Russia have been exposed, and visits that he's made to certain people and so on. The fact he's not publishing it, again, if there's nothing to hide, why would you publish it, is my thinking.
Well, it's always been the same, isn't it? If they've nothing to hide, why are they hushing it up?
Absolutely.
So it's obviously something damaging.
Absolutely, and I think so. I mean, I think Boris Johnson is if you look at the people he's surrounded with, they're not politicians anymore anyway, they're big money people with links to various places you wouldn't want to go. So I think the fact he's sitting on this report just says everything, and I don't understand why people would vote for somebody.
There is, as we understand it now, a lot of so-called dark money which has been flowing in to the Conservative Party as donations through various shell companies and other private individuals. But a lot of it has come from Russian residents who now, or it's had to have come through them because they have to live in the UK in order to make the donations to the Tory party. But there are a large number of extremely wealthy landowners and property owners in London who are obviously Russian oligarchs and millionaires or business people.
And this is really disturbing because I thought you were talking about citizenship there, but I don't think you are. Whereas in Malta, that's a huge problem because Malta is selling of passports, people acquiring citizenship. Russian mafia people have bought passports.
They're allowed to buy their citizenship, essentially.
Basically,
we understand it also happens in London that if you're wealthy enough, you can buy your citizenship so you can become a resident of the United Kingdom.
Yes, and then you get access to the EU
and own
and
property here
and
pay donations towards political parties that you favour.
Yeah.
And although there's been an awful lot of reports of Russian interference in all kinds of things, but it's generally thought that Russia doesn't actually have a particular axe to grind in wanting Brexit or not wanting Brexit. They just want chaos to happen, as somebody said the other day. They are sowing chaos in the West.
It could be. I mean, I really don't know because, I mean, you have, stuff going on with Trump as well and the connection between Russia and Trump.
And Trump is another disruptive influence, isn't he?
Absolutely. And the end result of this, I don't understand. Maybe it's right. Maybe it is just chaos that they want because I don't really see the plan. What is the plan? Just to smash things up or what?
I think Well, we suspect, or many people suspect, that it's to keep the West busy. So it's not looking at what Russia is actually doing. It takes the heat off Russia, in other words, if the West has got too many other problems to sort out of its own making. I'd like to actually bring us round now to your sort of area of expertise and talk now about the Maltese businessman who was arrested in connection with Daphne Caruana Galizia's murder. Now, is it Daphne, or am I reading it wrong? It's Daphne. Yep, Daphne Galizia was an investigative journalist. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell our viewers a little more about what happened to her, what she was investigating?
Sure. So she was an investigative journalist, and she exposed corruption in Malta on a massive scale and at the highest levels. And she had been working as a journalist for about 30 years. For the last nearly 10 years of her life, she had a blog, which was read by more people that read the papers every day. And she investigated and exposed corruption at the highest levels of this government and beyond. I mean, the cash for passports I was talking about a minute ago. She exposed lots of stuff that was going on there. And the stories that she exposed, I mean, some things have now come out since she was murdered. So the stories she exposed have been proven to be true, either during her lifetime or
and she was murdered in quite an unnecessarily spectacular and horrible way, if I remember. Wasn't
hideous. It was hideous.
Was it a car bomb?
She was blown up in her car just minutes from her home in October 2017.
It's literally outside her own home.
Literally minutes from her house.
Now, I know also that in light of what's happened with Miss Galizia and her death, that there have been demonstrations going on today, and we should have some clips here of the demonstrations that we're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening here in this clip?
So this demonstration, as you say, it's happening today, earlier on today. Just to give you a little bit of background, yesterday the news broke that a middleman had been arrested. So they've already got three guys just on trial who are thought to maybe have detonated the bomb that killed Daphne Caruana Galizia.
The middleman, is this the man who facilitated or organised the bombing?
So the thinking is that there are the people who detonated the bomb, then someone in the middle, there's probably quite a few more levels actually, and then the top person or people who masterminded the whole thing and ordered it. So yesterday the news came through that there was a middleman had been arrested last Thursday apparently, and the news on top that the Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, was going to give him a presidential pardon. This is deeply problematic, because it's right at the heart. He was going to
pardon the man before he had even been convicted?
No, he was going to pardon the man on the grounds that he testified in court, it was corroborated in court, and basically if it proved to be true, as far as I understand it anyway, the man would be given a pardon for his part in the assassination and for previous crimes.
So this was a plea bargain, really, as Americans would call it?
Kind of. I'm not sure if it's the same as a plea bargain, but basically, okay, so you give us this information.
He would turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity or immunity from prosecution.
Yes.
Now, this man, I understand his name is Jorgen Finech.
No, this is today's news, okay?
No.
Nothing stands still in Malta. Everything happens very quickly. So this was being discussed yesterday because the Prime Minister's right-hand man and his Minister for Tourism now, Konrad Mitzi, are both implicated in all of this. So to hear the Prime Minister say he'll give a presidential pardon to somebody if they tell him who the mastermind is, you immediately say, okay, what's going on? Because the Prime Minister has been covering up for these people for the past 3 years.
So there's something very strange about this offer of immunity in exchange for...
Extremely strange. And then today, so having said and contradicted himself with previous statements he's made where he's not in favour of a presidential pardon, but today the news came through at 5:30 a.m. this morning. One of the people who's been named as a potential suspect, one of the main potential suspects, is this person, Jorgen Finech. So he was arrested today. His yacht apparently was sailing away from Malta, and the armed forces of Malta arrested him, or brought the yacht back, and he was arrested. Now, Jürgen Fenech is the chairperson of a thing called Electrogas.
Yeah.
As part of the Labour Party are in power in Malta, that's the name of the party, okay? As part of their kind of election pledge in 2013, when they won the election with a big majority, they announced this great big new power station. This power station was going to deliver, your fuel bills are going to be cut and everything else. The power station was operated by a consortium which was kind of given the go-ahead, also in very dubious means, and also exposed by Daphne back in 2013. Jürgen Fenech is the chairperson of Electrogas. The consortium is a bit complicated,
I
I
think
apologise.
we're beginning to see a picture forming here. Yep. Of
Over
vested
30% of ownership was also by a thing called SOCAR, which
Yep.
is the Azerbaijan state oil company. And immediately, Panama companies were set up by the Prime Minister's right-hand man.
So we're
Keith
talking
Shikembe.
about shell companies set up in Panama.
We're talking about Panama companies being set up by the Prime Minister's accountants,
So these
the
are
Mossack Fonseca of Malta, and
Yeah.
they did it via Mossack Fonseca, for these particular two individuals, the Prime Minister's right-hand man, Chief of Staff, Keith Shikembe, and Conrad Mitzi, who was then the Energy Minister and is
So-
now the Minister for
so
Tourism,
accounts are being
both
set up
exposed
for-
in the Panama Papers.
So, and this, of course, came out when the so-called Panama Papers were leaked in the last, 2 years ago, I think? the Panama Papers.
2016,
2016, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
And this was where Daphne herself started to hit the trail, as it were, to find out where this money had come from or where it led to.
She saw...
She must have realised the connection
She was an
straight away.
extremely astute woman, extremely astute, extremely knowledgeable. She rumbled various various projects that the Labour Party were doing. She rumbled them all over the process of the years that they were in power and before she was assassinated. She exposed the Panama Papers to Mitzi and Shikembe. In 2017, in February, she exposed this thing called 17 Black, which connects with today's arrest. Okay, 17 Black was a Dubai-based company which was set up to pump money, massive amounts of money in the form of kickbacks, into the accounts of the right-hand man and the Minister for Tourism.
Right.
This was exposed, and by the time she died, she had in her possession thousands of leaked documents from Electrogas. So she had these in her possession. Nobody knew who the owner of 17 Black was at that time. A year ago, almost exactly, it was announced through the Times of Malta in conjunction with Reuters via the Daphne Project, which was set up to continue investigating her stories.
Yeah.
They announced the owner of 17 Black is Jürgen Fenech.
So the man who was arrested escaping
Today.
on his yacht, in other
Yes.
words, is the owner of the company.
A whole year later.
Aye, when
You
it's
know?
a little bit late to...
Well, nothing happened. Nothing happened.
So the discovery is made, the whistle is blown, but nothing happens to change anything.
This is the story of Malta.
Is
You can be outed in the Panama Papers, but you're still in your position. Nothing happens. No resignations, nothing.
Is the European Union demanding an inquiry into what's happening?
The Council of Europe demanded back in June that there be an independent public inquiry into the assassination, and that demand is still very much in place. The government announced not very long ago, because originally they announced, here are the three people, 6 days before the deadline of the inquiry in September, they announced, here are the three people to lead the inquiry. But the three people they'd chosen were all connected to the government. So the Council of Europe said, no, thank you. Recently, they appointed a new panel, which has been accepted by the Caruana Galizia family. Obviously, it will be carefully monitored because the Council of Europe are there to do that. Various terms of reference have changed, including not just what could have been done to prevent Daphne being assassinated, but was there any ways in which the state caused a context?
Or
which could facilitate her
set a chain of
assassination.
events in motion which led to her being
Yes, or
assassinated.
facilitated a context in which it could occur. And right now, that's what people are saying, because the Prime Minister has protected the two people who were going to benefit from 17 Black.
Yeah.
Jürgen Fenech has just been arrested today. So the two people who are going to benefit from kickbacks, from the power station, for the whole thing, he's been protecting them all the way through. So the argument now coming through from the protesters that you saw earlier on video, two main groups, Occupy Justice and Republica, is that he has created a situation where of impunity. So an assassination can occur in this kind of context.
And nothing is done because he's in charge of
Yes.
what, the judiciary, the police.
State captured.
Are they all under the control of is he the Prime Minister or the President?
He's the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
He's the Prime Minister.
I heard you saying earlier on a presidential pardon. Is that just a phrase?
No, because there is a president as well, but the president's a
I
political appointee, and the Prime Minister took it upon himself. I will shoulder this responsibility for giving this pardon. You go, where? And also, where are the police? You know, we have a very silent police commissioner.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question. Where are the police in all of this? Have the police made any statements about this?
We have a police commissioner who, I think, Joseph Muscat went through 5 police commissioners in almost as many years to make sure he got one in place who would do what he wants him to do. So you have a very silent police commissioner. We, Occupy Justice, demanded his resignation. Shortly after the assassination. He's still in place. He says nothing. Sometimes he refuses to meet. Well, he's refused to meet the MEPs when they come to Malta.
If the government in Malta is so corrupt, is there any way of dislodging them, or do they have such control over everything that they can manipulate the results of general elections as well? Are they that powerful?
Well, we had Cambridge Analytica crawling around in Malta prior to the 2013 election. There's a direct connection between Cambridge Analytica and the people who sell the passports in Malta, Henley and Partners, and that's through Christian Kalin, who's got a company, SCL, which is a sister company of Cambridge Analytica. So the connections are all there. Yep. But what's been happening recently, I think we've all felt it in Malta, is that there's been a kind of sea change. So it's been very, very difficult to kind of get protests together. Many people have supported the government. Corruption works for them, so they support them. But the more it's affected people in terms of their daily lives, as I said before, the construction industry is having a hellish effect and hellish impact on Malta. There are cranes everywhere, houses are collapsing. Yeah. So people are getting affected by direct experience of what's going on.
The kind of activities that its government is promoting in the construction industry as well is actually causing the tourist industry harm now.
Well, I think for sure it will, but it's also causing local people, people who just live there in their daily lives. Traffic is a nightmare. Yeah. Because of their appalling lack of ability to actually plan. Nothing is planned because a lot of the important jobs are in the hands of people who are not qualified, just cronies.
They're just cronies and family members or friends.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've really lifted the lid on this for us, because I think in Scotland particularly, we probably had no idea what was really going on in Malta until
it's very
you
difficult
want to explain this to us.
To try to explain even who Jürgen Fenech is in a matter of 2 minutes, let alone the kind of suspicion with which you view what's going on. That he was arrested on his yacht. Everybody sees everything in Malta.
There are a lot of extremely shady characters with yachts, apparently.
Well, there are, but the thing is, the connection to the government is a root. Nothing is not connected to this corrupt government.
Oh. Well, we have our own corruption problems to deal with here, but nothing on this scale, thankfully, I hope. We are going to move on to another story, which this one is a pretty unpleasant story, and this is a leaked EU report reveals migrants for profit being detained in Libya. The EU has admitted in a leaked report that it cannot monitor the Libyan Coast Guard, and that the detention of migrants is a profitable business model for Libya's government, with whom it has recently renewed a controversial deal to stem migration to Europe. The report details the fate of refugees fleeing for Europe who have been picked up by the Brussels-backed Coast Guard and put in official and unofficial detention camps in dire and often dangerous conditions. Widespread human rights violations, deaths, unexplained disappearances, bribery and corruption are cited in the 13-page paper, which still praises the progress achieved in reducing the numbers leaving the Libyan coast for Europe. Under a recently renewed multi-million euro deal, the European Union and Italy provide the Libyan Coast Guard with cash and with training and boats to intercept migrants in the Mediterranean, as a part of an attempt to block people from European shores. The decision was made last month to continue with the deal and to provide an extra €5 million in funding, despite the admission in the European Union's paper that the conditions for migrants in Libya have deteriorated severely recently due to security concerns related to the conflict and to developments in smuggling and trafficking dynamics and the economy. In addition to the worsening situation in the overcrowded detention facilities, now Libya, I'm sure you know, living even closer to it for what was 11 years, Malta was very much closer to Libya and also affected by this trafficking, I assume.
Yes, hugely.
Did Malta have the same kind of problems that Italy and Sicily have been experiencing? Was it on the same level?
For many, many years, boats of people were arriving and coming from appalling situations. But recently, there's been various kind of things have occurred. One of them is the exposure that Malta was negotiating with Libya to send Libyans back to exactly the situation that you were talking about there, to be raped, to be tortured, to be abused, whatever. And the person who was put in charge of mediating this process was a guy who was already, I don't know if he was actually convicted because nobody's convicted in Malta, but this guy works for the Prime Minister, and he was involved in selling medical visas to Libyans during the war or just after the war.
So exploiting the people fleeing
and this
Libya.
came up very recently. And this guy was put in charge, very kind of cynical. I mean, it's brutal actually in its reality. But this same man who was trying to extort money from war-wounded Libyans was put in charge by the Maltese government of negotiating this, sending Libyans back. And it is a horror story beyond a horror story.
And of course, these are not Libyan citizens that are being smuggled. These are people who have come from other countries in Africa, poorer countries, and have flown through Libya by Libyan traffickers, presumably, and now Europe and Malta are wanting to push them back into Libya.
Yes, which is just,
so they become somebody else's problem.
Well, they become the problem of people who are going to rape and torture them.
And of course, the people who are trafficking them both out and back are getting paid for it as well.
Absolutely. The idea that people are making money out of this
it's appalling, isn't it?
Yeah, stomach churning doesn't come close. What we also had in Malta recently too was talking about detention centres. There was rioting went on a couple of weeks ago, and despite the fact there are criminals in the seat of the parliament, they arrested 107 migrants. Some of them were young, some of them were teenagers. Yeah. So there was exposure of the actual situation in the detention centres and the open centres where unaccompanied minors are being placed with adults, which is illegal, living in cockroach infested, because we have rather disgusting cockroaches in Malta, cockroach infested conditions, not fit for anybody, let alone a human being. So they arrested 107 migrants. Suddenly the police step into action, having done nothing to try and find the killers of Daphne Caruana Galizia. And the 107 migrants were arrested, and they were provided with 2 legal aid lawyers between them.
That's it.
Yeah. And then imprisoned.
Incredible. Well, we're going to stay with, hopefully, with corruption. That seems to be the theme going through this programme this evening. Alleged corruption, this time in the United States. And this one involves, of course, Donald Trump. And according to a US diplomat who is a pivotal witness in the impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump, said on Wednesday that he worked with Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, on the Ukraine issues, and the president's orders confirming the Trump's active participation in the controversy that threatens his presidency. Now, unlike other witnesses who have testified in the televised impeachment hearings, Sondland, this is the chap in question, had communicated directly with Donald Trump as he pressured the Ukraine to undertake investigations which could boost the president's re-election prospects next year. Now, that undercuts a central argument of Trump's Republican defenders that many of the witnesses at the inquiry were relaying second or even third-hand information and didn't actually have direct knowledge of Mr. Trump's intentions. So this is a key witness who's now coming forward and saying that it was the president himself who was in the loop, as he calls it. Everybody was in the loop. And this really contradicts what Mr. Trump's been saying, which is that he wasn't in the loop and this didn't happen, and these people are basically, this is hearsay evidence, it never happened. We have Sondland said about. Let me just say a little more on this. Sondland had said that Giuliani pressed the Ukraine to investigate Burisma, a natural gas company on which Hunter Biden, the son of Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, had served as a director. Giuliani also wanted the Ukraine to investigate a discredited conspiracy theory that Kiev and not Moscow had interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Now, this is where we get to the so-called quid pro quo. Now, this is the thing which Donald Trump says doesn't exist. In other words, the exchange. So Sondland had said that Trump's administration refused to arrange a telephone call and set up a coveted Oval Office meeting between the president and Ukraine's new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, unless the Ukrainian leader publicly promised to undertake investigations that could help Trump politically. And this again contradicts Trump's main defense that there was no explicit exchange of favors between the two countries. Now, Sondland says that he gradually came to realise that the White House was also withholding $391 million in security aid in order to pressurise Kiev. And he says he told Zelensky aide in early September that the Ukraine would probably not get the money until it took some kind of action on the public statement that we had been discussing for many weeks. So here we have a very explosive witness who looks like he has demolished Donald Trump's initial denials that anything of the kind even happened.
I think, it goes back to the beginning where Boris Johnson, you mentioned Boris Johnson talking about truth.
Truth, yes.
Of all things. And it's the same with Donald Trump. I mean, it is quite incredulous that we have a situation where we have a president of the United States who just says says whatever comes into his head, whatever suits him at that time, and will say something is true or not true according to what suits him, and that people clap and say, oh, very good. And we have pretty much the same with Boris Johnson. It's pretty much the same thing, where ideas of truth are really dependent on which way the wind is blowing for me that particular day.
Well, Donald Trump tends to often prefix whatever he says with, I've done nothing wrong but, where he states from the outset that he believes he's done nothing wrong, but he's going to go along with some kind of inquiry just to humour them. And he does this with everything, basically. He denies, before he even starts speaking, he'll deny that he's done anything wrong.
Well, he was the one that really coined the phrase fake news. I mean, I really hate that phrase. I hate it with a perfect hatred because it undermines...
It's a corrosive sort of phrase. It's something which creeps into everything and undermines it.
It's something that he employs for news that does not correspond with his agenda and does not praise him. So anything that doesn't agree with his way of seeing is fake news. So it's become a very dangerous tagline for anything. And it's like, no, in a world situation where there are huge questions about what is true and what is false, and social media just adds to that whole melting pot big time, we have to be able to distinguish between the terms we use. You know, fake
Yeah.
news is just too easy. That can cover everything.
Well, fake news is also something which we suffer from a little bit here in Scotland sometimes, and no more so than when the media is discussing Scotland's health service. And in the story today, there has been a statement by the Scottish Government's Health Secretary, Jane Freeman, at Holyrood today to update MSPs on the latest position of the paediatric haematological oncology wards at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Now, there is, I believe, a little video footage of this statement, which we should have coming up now.
And I call on the Cabinet Secretary, Jean Freeman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide members with an update on the position of the paediatric haematology oncology wards at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. I want to start by offering my deepest sympathies to the families affected. To lose a loved one in any circumstances is hard, but I cannot begin to imagine the pain of losing a child in these circumstances, or the suffering and grief that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. I also want to apologise to them that they feel they have not had their questions answered. They are absolutely right to ask and pursue their questions, and they are entitled to have them answered and to receive the support they need. I take very seriously the concerns highlighted to me about the deeply concerning issues which have been raised by a whistleblower. Our NHS, indeed all our public services, can only flourish and improve when everyone working in there feels they can confidently speak up. There is no room in our health service for anyone to criticise whistleblowers publicly or otherwise, or to put them in fear for the safety of their jobs. Whistleblowing is not something people who have dedicated their lives to healthcare do lightly. It takes courage, and they should be thanked. Much of our health service exemplifies this approach, and it is right to thank all NHS Scotland staff who work every day to give the best quality of care to their patients. They deserve significant credit for helping to make our health service one of the safest in the world. But even so, things can go wrong, and when they do, I expect boards to respond professionally, transparently and speedily. The whistleblower who came forward last week stated that an internal clinician-led review within NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde had identified additional cases of infection amongst paediatric cancer patients, including a child who died in 2017. My officials are urgently seeking details of this review so that we can fully understand the findings and what action the board took in response. Following my announcement of a statutory public inquiry on the 17th of September this year that would examine issues at the Queen Elizabeth campus in Glasgow and the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People in Edinburgh, I received correspondence from a bereaved parent concerning the death of their child in 2017. This was the first notification I had received about this tragic death. I replied expressing my concern for them and my condolences for their sad loss. I advised them that a representative of the board would make personal contact with them to ensure any questions and concerns were fully addressed. I understand that contact has now been made with the family, and I am clear that I expect the board to do all they can to support them and provide clear answers to their questions. Over the course of the last weekend, other families have made contact with me. It would not be right for me to discuss the details of each case publicly, and it would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment further on any case which is subject to an ongoing Crown Office investigation. However, I want there to be no doubt that I am fully committed to ensuring that every family receives the answers they are entitled to. It isn't a requirement, nor would it be appropriate, for the Scottish Government to be notified of every patient death. But my clear expectation is that our NHS must support families by providing them with the accurate information they need to understand what has happened and what is being done, and to do that in a clear, transparent and timely way. I expect all NHS boards to ensure that communication and engagement with parents and families is centred on the needs of the patient and the family. I also expect boards to have considered whether the National Adverse Events Framework or the organisational duty of candour procedure should be applied, and that patients and families are genuinely involved in discussions about such decisions.
So there we heard from the SNP's, the Scottish Government's Jane Freeman on problems facing the Glasgow, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow recently. Now, final story this evening, Lizzie, is a good news story, actually, for a change. And Scotland is to incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children into law to the maximum extent possible within the powers of the Scottish Parliament. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, announced the approach following an extensive public consultation. The UNCRC is the most complete statement of children's rights ever produced and sets out the rights of every child, irrespective of where they live, their religion, or the makeup of their society. And this includes rights relating to health and education, fair and equal treatment, and the right to be heard. To incorporate the UNCRC into law, a bill will be laid before the Parliament next year. The bill will allow for incorporation of the provisions of the Convention currently beyond the powers of the Scottish Parliament, should these powers change in the future. And speaking on the 30th anniversary of the Convention, Mr. Swinney said, "Through the responses to our consultation, it is clear that there is a widespread support for directly and fully incorporating all of the rights set out in the Convention. Our bill will take a maximalist approach. We will incorporate the rights set out in the UNCRC in full and directly in every case possible using the language of the Convention. Our only limitation will be the limit of the powers of this Parliament, limits to which many of us obviously object." Now, the Scottish Greens MSP John Finney has called on the Scottish Government to seek an order under Section 30 of the Scotland Act 1998 to allow ministers to fully incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. Now, this Section 30 order is also in many ways similar to what is required for us to hold a referendum on independence. Interestingly, it's a way of forcing the British government to abdicate some powers and to give them to the Scottish Parliament. So Mr. Finney, who recently steered the Children Equal Protection from Assault Scotland Bill through Parliament, made the call in response to a statement from the Education Secretary, John Swinney, this afternoon. Now, this sounds initially like quite a lot of legalese, but what this does is it seems to give every child in Scotland human rights, something which many of us in Scotland are worried about for adults. But it looks to protect them under the law, I think, for the first time. I don't know if this has been incorporated into law across Europe, but it's the first time, I believe, in the United Kingdom.
And I'm shocked at what didn't already exist already.
You would expect it to, wouldn't
Yes,
you? And
yeah.
it is rather shocking that it hasn't been done up until now.
Uh-huh.
And yet, as Mr. Swinney is pointing out, they need some extra powers in order to make this happen. I mean, the law is actually already there, and I think it is used in Europe in some areas.
Okay.
Let me just finish with a little bit of what John Finney, the MSP, has said. He said he was delighted to bring forward and pass a bill which provided Scotland's children with equal protection from assault recently. This was a huge step forward for children's rights in Scotland. But if we are serious about becoming the best country for children to grow up in, then it is incumbent on both the Scottish and the UK governments to work together to this end. What Mr. Finney was referring to was a bill which he successfully steered through Parliament, which banned smacking of children, corporal punishment, which has now passed into law. And I think Mr. Swinney, if I beg your pardon, I always get the two mixed up, Swinney and Finney. John Finney is wanting to see this taken further so that children will not be physically punished.
Which again I thought was already in place.
Well,
But did they bring it into law in England and not Scotland?
The smacking ban seems to be unique to the Scottish Parliament. The problem apparently is that in order to get the United Nations Charter through on behalf of children, the Scottish Government needs to ask for a Section 30 order, which is precisely what they're having to ask for in order to have a referendum recognised by the United Kingdom. It's not stopping us having a referendum, but it stops the UK from, shall we say, abiding by its findings or abiding by its result. But they have, the Scottish Government has recently got its referendums bill through its first stage in Holyrood, and they hope to have the referendums bill passed into law before the end of this year, which will allow the First Minister to call a referendum next year.
With or without Boris Johnson's consent?
Yeah, and hopefully also to try and put pressure on the British Government for a Section 30 order to allow this kind of legislation to protect children as well. So it is a good news story in a way, but it's very dependent on what happens in the United Kingdom, as usual in Scotland. Whenever anything good happens, it's always held back in some way, sadly. Anyway, we've just about run out of time this evening. I'm sorry it's gone by very quickly this evening, Lizzie. But I want to thank you for coming in and for giving us such great detail on what's happening in Malta. It was quite fascinating and also quite worrying as well, in a way.
Well, it is a very worrying situation. So
anyway, we're glad to see you're safe and sound back in Scotland and hopefully here to stay for a while this time.
That's my plan, yes.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's it from Scotland at 7 tonight. And as my usual tradition is at the end of the programme, to remind you that making television programmes is, of course, an expensive business. And here at Broadcasting Scotland, we rely on you, our viewers, to support us. And to do that, you simply need to follow the directions on your screen now and give your £5 a month to help us make more programmes for the future. Anyway, that's about it from Broadcasting Scotland this Wednesday evening. I will be back in my usual time slot, I hope, on Monday. In the meantime, we are, I believe, broadcasting in Fort William tomorrow. But we're not certain of that at the moment. There's a question mark over that. But anyway, for all of us here at Scotland at 7, a very good night to you.